Bonjour à tous. Hi, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to extend my condolences to the family and loved ones of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. The allegations that a representative of a foreign government may have been involved in the killing of a Canadian citizen here in Canada on Canadian soil is not only troubling, but it is completely unacceptable. If proven true, this would be a grave violation of our sovereignty and of the most basic rule of how countries deal with each other. We've been clear we will not tolerate any form of foreign interference. Since this was brought to our attention, we've been guided by three principles. The first one, we will seek the truth. The second one, we will protect Canadians at all times. And thirdly, we will protect Canada's sovereignty. I've conveyed these principles to my Indian counterpart, and I've also told him that we expect India's full collaboration to make sure that we get to the bottom of this. And as of today, and as a consequence, we've expelled a top Indian diplomat from Canada. You want to add anything?
No, you have questions? Or?
When did you learn about this?
So, of course, like I said, our first principle is definitely to seek the truth that will eventually lead to justice. And so we're limited in what we can say today because we want to protect, of course, the investigation, and Dominic can add to that. But what I can tell you is from the moment we learned, we acted. For my part, I've had conversations with my counterpart, and also I've had conversations with key allies, and we'll be working with them. The Prime Minister raised it also with Prime Minister Modi. He raised it with President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak as well. And of course, today we're acting by expelling a key diplomat, but we will get to the bottom of this.
India responded.
Well, that's a question that you should be asking to India. But what I can tell you, though, is that my expectations are clear. I expect India to fully collaborate with us and ultimately to get to the bottom of this.
Does this diplomat have any direct link to this alleged assassination?
It is the head of RAW in Canada. The Indian Intelligence Agency in Canada. We can provide you some background information to understand what that means.
It's the lack of collaboration. Like, what have you asked of India that they haven't been doing?
So, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Could you be more specific about the lack of collaboration with India? What are we asking them to do that they're not doing so far? Is it that they're being obstinate in interviews, or are they just not even picking up the phone? Or
we expect them to fully collaborate with the investigation. And maybe you want to add anything to the importance of the investigation.
So I think it's important to your question of when were we made aware of these allegations. Credible intelligence and information, as the Prime Minister said, for a number of weeks has been in the hands of the Canadian Security Services. I think it's also important to note that the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, the Director of CSIS, have traveled on a number of occasions in recent weeks, also to India, to meet their counterparts in India, to confront the Indian intelligence agencies with these allegations. But as Melanie said, this is also an active homicide investigation led by the RCMP in British Columbia. So one needs to be very careful to not prejudice the ability of law enforcement, and we hope ultimately prosecutors, to hold the perpetrators to account for this murder of a Canadian citizen.
How is the lack of collaboration affecting the ability to investigate?
Well, we're investigating a homicide that happened on Canadian soil. That is the responsibility of the RCMP. They are doing all that is necessary to ensure that that is a robust investigation, to follow all of the evidence, and to ultimately hold those accountable for this crime on Canadian soil, accountable under Canadian law. the details of these investigations are not properly organized or shared or run by politicians. The RCMP, I have every confidence, are doing everything that's necessary to hold the perpetrators to account.
Without getting into specifics, is it hampering the investigation at all? Like, does it matter materially that they won't collaborate?
Again, you're characterizing them as not collaborating. The commissioner of the RCMP or others could talk about with whom they're working on this investigation. I want to be careful not even to accept that characterization. I have confidence that the RCMP and other security agencies collaborating with them will do all of the work that Canadians expect of them to both keep the community safe in Canada, because the RCMP and other law enforcement agencies have a responsibility to ensure that Canadians, as Melanie said, are not subject to violence or to intimidation, and in the case of Mr. Nijjar, the most tragic consequences of all. They're taking that responsibility seriously, but they're also taking the responsibility of investigating a homicide that happened on Canadian soil.
I assume you were in the meeting with Mr. Modi at the G20. What was his response when the Prime Minister...
I was not in the meeting. I was.
Did we bring how many diplomats from Canadian diplomats in India? Is anything being done to secure or safeguard them?
Of course. So our goal is always to abide by a duty of care. So I've been in close contact with our High Commissioner there. I've had numerous conversations with him, numerous conversations also with my Deputy Minister, and we're ensuring that our diplomats are not only safe, but also that India is respecting the very principles of the Vienna Convention on the security and safety of diplomats.
Can just quickly, in terms of the inquiry led by Justice Ugg, she started her work today. We have always said that foreign interference is not the unique purview of one country. There are a number of countries that have sought to interfere in a way that violates Canadian law. Obviously, these allegations are at a much more serious level in terms of the extreme violence that may have been perpetrated against a Canadian citizen with a link to a foreign government. The good news is Justice Ugg's terms of reference allow her to follow the evidence and to look at all the countries that are seeking to interfere in a way that's against Canadian law. So we assume that she and the security agencies will do what's necessary for her inquiry to also look at the ways that India interferes in Canada. It was always contemplated in the terms of reference.
Just repeat that in English about why now, Minister, please.
So, of course, there was already information that was available in the public domain. And so we wanted to make sure that we were transparent with Canadians. And we wanted to make sure also that we would be able to protect Canadians and protect Canada's sovereignty. Tonight I'm heading to New York, where I'll be having dinner with the G7 foreign ministers. Of course, I will be raising this issue with them. It is the UN General Assembly, and therefore I will be meeting with many of my counterparts from around the world. Right now, we know we are in an international security crisis. And one of the fundamental rules behind the world's stability and security is the protection of each country's sovereignty. And we see this possible breach of sovereignty as completely unacceptable. And so that is also why we're coming up with this information today.
Are you asking them to act? Are you asking your counterparts to do something?
Of course, I expect them to work with us on this very issue. And that is why I've had conversations with my counterpart, but also this is why the Prime Minister had a conversation with President Biden and also with Prime Minister Sunak. Thank you.